One game, two maps might seem like a lot of effort for your D&D or TTRPG campaign, but the real question is, what is your map actually doing? What is it showing? When you're creating a world to explore for your players, are you going to hand your players a roadmap to everything that you've got planned, or are you going to give them a piece of world building that lets them explore as they go? A piece of aesthetic, stylistic, and lore with which they can slowly build out not just an understanding of the world, but their understanding of the world. Hello adventurers, and welcome back to the Red Quills. My name is Ryan, and today we are discussing a question that's come up in my comments a few times now, and one which I thought really needed its own video, which is, what is the difference between a player map and a DM's map? And how can we make one of each for a campaign? So today in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create two maps out of the same sheet of A2 paper. Normally what I do in these videos is I make one A2 map, but in this particular case, because I wanted to explore not only the stylistic differences that I really wanted to point out, but also the level and kind of information that you want to see on each kind of map, it just made sense to make two smaller maps given the time period that I have. So what I'm going to do today is first make the DM map and discuss the information that you'll want to put on it, and then discuss the player map, and we'll talk about aesthetics and styles then, and then we're going to compare the two so that you can come back and think to yourself, okay, I've got a map of the world. Is it a player map or is it a DM map? And what do I need to do moving forward to explore my world properly and have other people explore it from a perspective of not knowing anything about it? So strap yourself in, and we're going to start with a blank sheet of paper. Now, as always, I use a thick 180 GSM watercolor piece of paper for this, and I'm going to start by dividing it into two smaller sheets. And as I go through, because I'm starting with the DM map, which I of course would always recommend that you do, I'm going to just start by very quickly sketching it out, and I'm not going to follow the standard process. So normally when I create videos on making maps, if you've seen my videos in the past, I talk about the very careful step-by-step process that you need to follow in order to make it readable. And you can find that in the video above if you haven't seen that video already. But in this particular case, because I'm focused more on information for the DM map than I am on readability, the process is slightly different. What we're going to do instead is focus first on labels. Everything else falls to the wayside over the priority that we have in this video, which is the world building. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend a great deal of time going through and labeling everything quite clearly and carefully. Now, the thing that we have to ask ourselves is how we can make that information easily accessible to someone who's already familiar with the map. Normally, the question is, how do you make information accessible to someone who isn't familiar with the map? So we need something that can compress a lot of information, but doesn't necessarily need to appear readable at a glance, but it still needs to be readable. So what I'm going to do first is divide the map into various kingdoms. Now, rather than wasting my time with borders and banners and sigils and things like that, this is just, of course, the map itself. And those kinds of details take up a lot of space and particularly eye interest, which is the value that a given point has in terms of priority, how easily seen it is at a glance. And because we don't want the eye to catch those details, because they're not as important as some of the other stuff that we're squeezing in, I'm just going to avoid putting them on this map in its entirety. What we need to do is clear out everything that's not of importance on the map so we can squeeze as many labels as possible. And so what I'm going to do when I start by creating this map and I'm going to put down the various nations is I'm going to color code them so that they're easily differentiated, so that I don't need to bother with borders, but I can see at a glance which cities and regions belong to which kingdom. So as we go through, I'm going to do the capitals first, and then I'm going to go through to the smaller towns, and I'm only using 3 different shades of sort of reddish colors. I'm going to go with red, pink, and purple. Again, easily differentiated, and as long as I stay within the same part of the color scale, it's not going to be confused with anything else. So if all political things are in the reds, and all nautical things are in the blues, and all natural things are in the greens, then again, it's still you're able to differentiate things at a glance, which is what we want to do. So I'm going to start filling up the map again. We want to maintain that visual hierarchy where towns are fairly small compared to the capitals and regions are fairly small compared to the kingdoms themselves. And I'm doing the labels first so that the natural borders, so that the coastlines and everything else is secondary to the information that we want to be able to access. Normally, the important thing we want to preserve is an understanding of what the land itself looks like. But for a DM, that's not as important as understanding what's in the world. So as we go through, I'm actually going to revisit a technique that I developed for one of my very first videos that has since been taken down. So if you've been with the Red Quills for now over 18 months, then thanks for joining us. But you probably haven't, and if you haven't seen that video. In that video, how to create trade maps, I talked about all the various details and ways that you could kind of sneak in an understanding of the economics of a map. And I really, really loved a lot of those ideas, but they were super complicated and not accessible for a lot of the other stylistic maps that I've done since. But this is a great opportunity to revisit that and talk about some of them and introduce them again to the larger audience that I have now. So one of the things that I did there was, instead of differentiating towns by the size of their icons, what I did instead was, for each of the labels, I had a marker system, starting from 1 dot going up to 5 dots. And instead of really showing us how large that is, because a lot of the time that's not as important, especially on a scale like this map, which we'll revisit later, those dots tell us how wide a range of goods is available in each of those towns. The idea being that when you go to one of the capitals, you can buy almost anything. When you go to one of these smaller, more isolated settlements, you can buy very little. And so when I'm creating the world building, not only will I have a scale of what you can buy there, but it also allows you to maintain a consistency of where, magical goods or potions or ingredients will be available. It also means that places that have the 5 dots, which are at the top of the scale, of which on this map there is only one, which is the pirate city of Koh-i-Noor, they suddenly have a much greater value to your player. That allows you to really show the world building and how everything is connected outside of what the players need, instead of just furnishing them with whatever they need by building the world around them. So what we're doing is we're creating a world that's explorable, that has its own network outside of the campaign. And I think that's really fun. So after we've gone through and we've done all the various towns, and you'll notice as well that I did forts as well. They have a little cross symbol. The reason being that I think that they're fairly important for a D&D campaign. And for me, they help to show, because I'm not showing the borders of the various kingdoms, they show where influence ends. So those can be your border posts. As I go through later and do the roads, I also have differentiated unpaved, unpatrolled roads with highways, which are paved, but are also more likely to have toll houses and toll bridges, which I've also marked with a darker brown. And so then you can have, within the world, a consistency of when people are going to be asking them for money, how the economy works, how much things are going to cost over a certain distance, and you can really build things up around that. And those are two of the main tricks from that trade video that I really wanted to bring back to this map. There are a few others that I didn't really get to that are really worth it. So I recorded the amount of money it would take for passage over certain sea routes, or what the exchange rate of certain currencies were as well. And those were really fun. I might bring that video back. If you like the sound of that, stick a comment below. Give this video a like if you're enjoying it so far. And we're going to carry on and talk about the travel details. So the important thing we want to do here is label everything, as I mentioned. And we've gone through and we've labeled all of the political landscape. I'm going to go through and label more of the natural landscapes, the islands, the lands, the regions, the bays as we go on through, and of course the seas as well. And then we're going to start doing the roads and the trading routes over the oceans, which are in the blue. And the roads, as I mentioned, we have two different functions. We have paved and unpaved, and that allows us to give different kinds of random encounters. So an unpaved road is more likely to have bandits, whereas a paved road, you're more likely to encounter, highway patrols who are corrupt and will try to extort money from the party and things like that. That kind of duality of different encounters is elsewhere in the map as well. For instance, in the nature markers we're going to be using later. But as we go through, we want to create a network of roads so that they are all connected. Now, the scale of this map is roughly 1.5 inches to 100 miles. So the size of this map is 1,000 miles across and 600 miles tall. So that gives us quite a large area we're looking at here. And according to some of the other videos that I've made in the past, we really want travelers to be able to stop roughly every day's travel or so. Not out in the wilderness, but certainly in the settled areas. If you've got wagoneers and caravans and traders, they're going to be looking to stop at that kind of distance. So that's where you'll be looking at farmsteads, settlements, and inns. Not necessarily larger towns, which are going to be recorded here, but when you're exploring the world itself, that's where they'll be. And for the purposes of this map, if you're wondering about what will be available there, you're looking at a 0-dot settlement for that kind of thing. So if they want to trade, they'll have to go to an area that is on the map. But as you go through, if you are designing highways like that, do keep in mind the cheapest route is what's going to be paved. So what is the quickest route from one place to another? Everything's either economic or military when you really boil it right down. And the military doesn't care as much about trading roads. So we're going to be looking at connecting the larger trade areas, which is why it's important at this first step to really see what level each town was, economically speaking, what range of goods they have. That shows not only how large they are population-wise, but how much influence they have over the area, how many people come to them for a specific good. And before we move on, we talked about the roads. I want to talk about the shipping routes. In the trading map, I had those accompanied by the toll that it would take to ship both cargo or people, which I thought was fun. But again, I don't really have the space on this map to do that. I don't have a pen fine enough, and my hands started shaking because of the level of detail that I put on here. So we avoided that, but I did want to show where it would be fairly easy to just hitch a ride on an already existing route, whereas anything that's not recorded here, they would need to charter a ship. So again, you've got that duality of whether the players can, hitch onto something that's pre-existing in the world or whether they need to do it themselves. And of course, those are two very different costs. So that's going to impact on their, enjoyment and immersion in the world. So then we move on to the natural details. I've already kind of done a couple of them. I'll do the coastline, I'll do the mountains, I'll do the rivers, and then we're going to move on to nature. And the icons that I'm using for nature are going to be very, very similar to what I've done previously. I'm going to do farmlands, marshlands, and forests. Marshlands are pretty standard. I'm not really going to fiddle with that, but the forests and the farmlands, I'm going to differentiate in two ways. We'll talk about the farmlands first because it's simpler. What I wanted to do was, again, show how the immersion can be different, by creating things on a map. So we've got light green farmland, we've got a dark green farmland, and I wanted to show the difference there between a milder climate and a colder climate, respectively. So the light green stuff is a more Mediterranean, whereas the dark green stuff is, more Northern European, like Germany or Belgium. And between the two of them, that gives you a different understanding of what kind of cultures will be there, what kind of goods you'll be able to buy, what kind of meals you'll be able to enjoy, and what the weather's going to be like just by showing you on the map without having to write any of that tedious stuff down. It's just implied within the creation of the nature symbols that we've got going for us. And those places that aren't surrounded by farmland, because we're aware that it takes a great deal of food to support a city like that, are the mage cities to the south. And the lack thereof is supposed to imply to the person reading the map that they must find their own food via a different method, entirely by trade or entirely by magic in this particular case, which of course influences not only their culture, but their influence over the world and how they treat other cities. And then last of all, we've got the forest symbols. I've got two of them, and normally they just differentiate what kind of tree you'll find, but not in this particular map. I've got the oval trees and the triangle trees, and normally they're cypress or oak and pine trees. And in this case, I wanted to show the difference between what I'll call woodland and what I'll call wilderness. And a woodland area for this particular map is an area that has been settled for quite a long time, that's within the boundaries of a given kingdom, and that has been more or less domesticated. You'll find woodland animals, you might find wolves or the occasional bear, but you won't very often encounter a monster like a griffin. That area has been tamed by inhabitants over, the course of centuries. Whereas the wilderness with the pine trees is denoting an area that doesn't have a huge amount of settlement in it, certainly no permanent presence. And so that's an area in which you are much more likely to encounter those kinds of monsters, in which a marauding dragon isn't an oddity, but something that you can be fairly sure that you'll encounter. Those are the areas that traders, caravans will be much more cautious about moving through, and the areas to which adventurers, if high enough level, will be drawn. And I really wanted to show that contrast between the two of them, because I think that that's a significant part of D&D. If you're within a kingdom and dragons are attacking, why is that happening when it's a tamed area? But if you're out in the wilderness, how do you show that it is a different kind of forest and a different kind of ecosystem than in a woodland, which has had inhabitation for hundreds or thousands of years? And then we're pretty much done with all of those details added. So we've got the labels for the various locations. We've got towns with their trading information. We've got regions. We've got natural landscapes. So we've got the names of various islands and the names of nautical areas. We've got traveling routes, both overland in terms of the road, and we've got sea routes as well. And then we've got the natural landscape. We've got the coastlines, the mountains, the rivers, and the various different levels of fauna and flora that we can expect to see. And that gives us a fairly good looking map, if I'm being honest, but you can see at first glance there's a lot of detail there. It's cool to look at, absolutely. But if you give this to a level 1 player, they are going to know as soon as they look at it that most of this information is not going to be used by them. So that means that this is definitely a map for a DM. Now, despite the fact that it looks pretty sexy, we do want to move on and create a player map. And the first question we have to ask ourselves is, what makes a player map different from a DM map? So the DM map that I just did, I did mainly in inks. What I'm going to do for the player map is I'm going to get the blank sheet of paper and I'm going to start with some watercolors, because I want something that's going to be aesthetic, and I want something that's eye-catching, and I want to really show the players as soon as they glance at it, this is something that's going to attract attention. I also want to, and this is something that's entirely up to you, if you don't want to do it, there are other styles that I have available on this channel if you want to go and look at them. But this style of map that I've chosen is a little bit more bare, not only because I don't want to give them as much information, but also because I want them to record their own information on it. So it needs to have blank areas that they can use to start recording things. And that, as an immersion tool, cannot be understated with its usefulness, because if you give them a map of a world that's already been explored, they're not explorers. If you give them a map that has far fewer details and they can start filling it out as they go, that means that they are actively making a difference in their understanding of the world. They are adding more and more on, and it becomes that much more important to take notes, which we as DMs love, right? They need to take more notes. Players, if you're watching this, take more notes. So we're going to start with some watercolors. I'm going to go through and do the coastlines first, and then I'm going to do the borders and the title. And the idea, of course, is that I want to use some broad colors that'll grab their attention. I'm going to keep it to a very specific color palette. Again, because if they use their own pens, then they're going to want to choose their own colors. So I'm going to boil it down to 3 colors for this: the dark blue, the red, and the black. And that's all we really kind of need for this, because we're not showing nearly as much nuance of detail. We just want to show the broad sweeping basics of it. So I'm going to go through and do the coastlines then, and the exact process of it is to lay a thicker line towards the coastline and then thinner and thinner levels of water so that it bleeds outwards. But if you don't want to use watercolors, if you have your own kind of tools, if you just want to use inks, you absolutely can. The idea, of course, is just using the bold colors to grab their attention. Then we're going to come through, we're going to do the borders, and we've got an idea of what the map looks like now. So I've sketched out the outline of the area. And the first thing that you may notice if you are an eagle-eyed viewer is that this is actually a smaller area than the DM map that I made before. Most of the western portion is still there, but a lot of the south and the east has been cut off. In fact, 2 whole civilizations, firstly the pirate city of Koh-i-Noor, and secondly the Pellaviri Reaches, have been entirely cut off from the map. And we can reference them on this map, but I think that it's a great idea, guys. I think it's a great idea when you make your own DM maps to not share all of the edges of the map with the players. So that when they ask what's beyond the border of the maps, you actually have an answer to them of a significant detail. So you don't need to make it too much further. 100 miles, 200 miles or so, just beyond the edge of the map is enough for them when they reach the borders to have a little bit more to go on. But it really kind of gives them the feeling that you have created an expansive and enormous world. So I would recommend doing that. In this case, I think it really works. I chose to do the part of the map that I would focus on starting the campaigns, and then really left off what I would consider to be the quest hook civilizations. So the pirate city of Koh-i-Noor and the Pellaviri reaches are for me where I would send high-level players later on. And then I'm going to come through and I'm going to add a little bit more decoration. And again, because this is for the players, because we don't need the same level of detail as we will be giving to the DM, we can do stuff that's a little bit more aesthetic. So I'm going to do the classic illustrations. And again, the purpose of that is not just to look good. Always ask yourself, what is the underlying purpose of creating the map? And the underlying purpose of this map is to immerse them in the world, to give them an impression of what it is like to be sitting at the tavern table looking at the map in world, to have an understanding of, have I visited the city and what does it look like from the outside? Yes, you have, and it looks like that. Those kinds of details allow them to commit more to their role play and to their experience of the world. So that's the kind of detail we want to be adding here. All of these decorative elements aren't just for fun and games. They are because that is what the players will be experiencing. We need the numbers. They need the story. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. As we go through, again, I'm going to choose the main cities to be the illustrated ones. And then I'm going to start by going around and adding on the other settlements as well. And you'll notice as I go through that I'm not adding all of them. Quite a few of the one-dot settlements, the ones that don't have a wide range of goods or a large population, they will be omitted from the map. And again, that allows you more fodder for, quests, or as they're moving on through, they can find things. Or if they ask, I want to find this particular person, you can say it's in this location. And they'll say it's not on the map. And you'll be like, cool, it's near this other settlement. Those kinds of things allow them to explore the world. And you can make more and more detailed or larger and larger player maps. But the idea, again, is that they can explore further and further. Then we go through and we add the broader details. So I want to add in the rivers, I want to add in the roads, I want to add in the labels for the areas, again in that red, same as the border, and then do nature. And there's not nearly as much nuance to that level of the map as there was for the first one. We're just, again, giving them an impression. I'm not labeling the forests, I'm not labeling the roads. They have no way of telling which road is a toll road or which road is an unpaved road. They can just get an understanding of what the world generally looks like. And then we'll finish up with some final details. I'll do the grid and I'll do the compass, and then it's done. Overall, the difference between the two of them is striking, and it did take me longer to do the DM map. So the DM map took me about 3.5 hours. The player map took me about 2 hours and 45 minutes in the end. I could have added a little bit more detail there, but again, I want to make these maps quite a contrast from one another, because I really wanted to hit home the different uses of the maps. And I can do that by making these as different as possible while still showing the same basic information. And it should be said, overall, I think the aesthetics of the DM map do look good. It's just that's not its major function. Its function is to show a great deal of information as simply and efficiently as possible. Whereas the player map is supposed to be a picture more than it is supposed to be a functional map. And overall, they do show the same basic information. Most of the towns are on both maps. The coastlines are still there. You know where the mountains are. You've got an understanding where the capitals will be. Overall, you could use either to explore the world, but the DM map's information is going to be the foundation for all of your world building. Not only can you use all of the trading and economic and wilderness information, but the placement of the other towns that have been omitted from this, the differentiation between the various kingdoms so that you know which areas are on the borders, where you can use as toll gates or toll bridges, how you can show a functioning economy and society outside of the requirements of your party, and be able to reference at different points, without needing to refer to them in your notes, to the names of various landmarks, the different islands and islets, the locations, the valleys and the mountain peaks that are around different areas that are too small or too unimportant to stick on a player's map, but you can have that consistency later on. You have to fill your DM map with as much information as possible. And this one, again, both of these are my approximation because I have limited time here. This is only 3.5 hours. If I were to spend 5 or 6 hours on it, I could literally cram this map with detail. But this is a fairly good balance. And you can check it out, by the way, on the Patreon. I have scanned it and uploaded it digitally there. It's available for free, as well as the player map. So you can use either. If you want to use it for your campaigns, please do. But let me know in the comments below what you think of either of them. Have you created a player versus DM map for your own world? What kind of details do you omit or add? And what do you think of my discussion of the different stylistic tendencies of both maps and my use of the duality between the wilderness icons, the farm icons, and the roads to show what kind of random encounters you can have in those areas. I want to thank my patrons and my YouTube members. As always, I can't do this without you guys. It's absolutely fantastic to be able to make these videos. And I will see you all next week for the start of our next series. I am creating a series on making maps for different genres. So if you don't like the look of this aesthetic map, perhaps you'll like the look of this aesthetic map, or maybe of this one, or perhaps of this one. As we go through, I'll talk about how you can use different aesthetics and styles of maps historically and in fiction to show the different genres and themes of your campaigns and add different details as we go through. If you like talking iconography, if you like talking styles and media, then that is the series for you. So hit that subscribe button and I will see you next week. But until then, happy mapping. So I really wanted to hit hard home. Hit home. So I really wanted to hit home. So I really wanted to hit, what are words? So I hit home? I wanted to heart, because I've forgotten what I was going to say now.